In this video, we're going to look at the transport in plants. And we know about this really from CSEC. Minerals and water are transported in the xylem, and water is lost by transpiration. And as water leaves, it pulls other water molecules up with it, with the transpiration pull. Now, sugars are transported in the phloem, and this occurs by bulk flow. We're going to discuss some of those in greater detail later. So transport in plants is basically transpiration and translocation. And transpiration occurs in the xylem, and translocation occurs in the phloem. So what we're going to do in this, we're going to explain the uptake of ions by active transport in roots. Then we're going to describe the entry of water into plant roots in terms of water potential. Basically, if ions are being absorbed by active transport, then the concentration in the root is going to be high, and therefore water is going to enter by osmosis. And then we're going to relate the structure of the xylem vessels to their functions. And we're going to explain the ascent of water in plants. I'll probably say more of this when we look at transpiration in detail. Water molecules have a tendency to stick together, kind of by cohesion, and therefore when water evaporates, water is pulled up the xylem vessel. So uptake of mineral ions then, and this occurs by active transport. So in order to absorb ions, the roots need a supply of energy, and therefore if they were supplied with a respiratory poison, such as potassium cyanide, absorption would stop. So the active transport of ions is partly responsible for water potential gradient in roots, and therefore some uptake of water by osmosis. And some ions also move into epidermal cells passively. But most ions are absorbed by active transport, and that's an important point. So the outermost layer of cells, which is the epidermis, contains root hairs. And here we have a root hair. And this increases the surface area of the root. So these have long extensions that increase the surface area. So they absorb water and mineral ions. Mineral ions come in by active transport, and the water will be drawn in by osmosis. And it's going to be carried to a xylem vessel that's going to be pulled upwards. Root hairs also have thin cell walls, and this greatly increases the ability of mineral ions to be absorbed. So where the root hairs are, the cell wall is thinner, and that's an important point. Then water enters the root hairs by osmosis. For osmosis to occur, there must be a higher concentration of solutes, such as mineral ions, inside of the cell than in the soil water surrounding the roots. And a high concentration of solutes means there is a low concentration of water in the root hairs compared to the soil water. And therefore water moves down the concentration gradient and enters the root hairs. So that's why water enters. And then plants take up water and essential minerals via roots, and thus need a large surface area in order to optimize this intake. And the root epidermis may have extensions called root hairs, which increase the surface area. So what we're saying here is that the high concentration of ions inside of the root, which occurs by active transport, causes water to move in by osmosis. And once it enters the cell, so once water enters the root, it can move towards the xylem by different pathways. You have the apoplastic pathway, which is in blue, and this is the main pathway by which water goes to the xylem vessel. It goes along cell walls. But once it goes to the endodermis, it's forced into the cell because of the Casparian strip, which is this structure here. This Casparian strip is a ring of hydrophobic material on the cell wall, and that means that the water can't move through it and is forced into the cytoplasm at this stage. So the apoplastic pathway is the most dominant as it offers least resistance. In the symplastic pathway, which is through the cells, it's going through this cell and this cell and this cell. In the symplastic pathway, molecules must pass through plasmodesmata, which offer resistance to movement. And plasmodesmata are kind of pores in the cell wall. So you have these little spaces, and water will move through the plasmodesmata. Well, plasmodesmata will contain cytoplasm, of course, and things such as endoplasmic reticulum and so on. And because of that, resistance is high. So we can see water goes into the epidermis, into the cortex, which is the main part of the root, and then into the endodermis. And notice in the endodermis, it is forced into the cytoplasm because of the Casparian strip, and then goes into the pericycle, which is another layer of cells, and then to the xylem. And into the stele, which is the layer of cells surrounding the xylem. So water and minerals are taken up by the hydrophilic walls of the root epidermis. They diffuse along permeable cell walls into the root cortex. So this is epidermis into the cortex. The apoplastic pathway involves transporting water and minerals through the apoplast, which includes the cell walls, the xylem, and the intracellular spaces between the cells. You also have the symplastic route, which involves transporting water and minerals through the symplast, or the cell cytoplasm, which are linked by plasmodesmata. Then water and minerals are immediately filtered as they cross the root hair, cell membrane, entering the symplast. So the water, in fact, gets filtered. So that means that if you grow crops and so on, the water that's entering the plant is filtered. So if you put manure and things on the soil, it doesn't go into the plant cells. The water and minerals move from cell to cell through plasmodesmata towards the stellate cylinder. And because these minerals and water are already in the symplast and already filtered by a membrane, they get to bypass the Casparian strip. And endodermal cells and the living celly cells release water and minerals out into the apoplast. And then the minerals hit the Casparian strip of axibaria in the apoplast that forces anything into the apoplast across a cell membrane for filtration before entering the celle or vascular cylinder. The filtered solution is released back into the apoplast on the other side of the Casparian strip by endodermal cells and living stellate cells. Then water and minerals in the stellate apoplast enter the xylem, where it flows by bulk flow up the roots. And water is driven by movement up, what is driven by decrease in water potential from the root air to the xylem. So adaptations of the xylem can carry water and minerals from roots to the shoot tips because they're made of dead cells, forming a continuous column. There's no breaks or barriers. It's just one continuous hollow tube. The tubes are narrow, so capillary action is effective. And pits allow water to move sideways. The lignin is strong and allows for stretching. And flow of water is not impeded as there are no end cells, no cell contents, no nucleus, and lignin prevents the tubes from collapsing. So we look at vessels. The xylem vessels, they have lots of bordered pits, lots of little holes, so water can move from one cell to the next. Vessels are different from tracheids, which are also used in water transport, but in things such as gymnosperms. And here the water transport is not quite continuous because there are end walls, although they have perforated pits for transport. And the next thing is to find thickening in xylem vessels. And thickening can be annular, simple, or reticulate. That's this part here. And these offer structural support and prevent the vessels from collapsing inwards. You can see a microscope image of xylem and metaxylem. And we can see a diagrammatic representation where we have spiral thickening or annular thickening. Well, we're going to move on to sieve tubes later on. So this is basically it.